afternoon. I'm Peter Sternlight with Sustainable Energy Hawaii. I'd like to welcome you all to our weekly Pahana. We're very pleased to have presenters from SSFM, a local resilience organization here in Hilo. And Noel, did you want us to,
Yes.
each do our own individual introductions, or because of the number of people here, how do you want to do this?
I think what we'll do is we'll just we'll jump into it. I think we'll introduce our
Our
speakers
guests.
and then give them the opportunity to present and carve out maybe 10 minutes at the end for Q&A.
Perfect.
Yeah, so
Peter,
slideshow.
do you mind just giving a quick intro to SEH?
Sure, we can do that. So for those who uh, are not familiar with Sustainable Energy Hawaii, we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. We've been operating since early 2020, sorry. And our main focus is on modernizing our approach towards energy, using energy and the information and education surrounding what energy is and how it impacts our community. One of the things that we're focused on is providing more information about what energy is. Most people are, as some of the our colleagues have termed it, are energy blind. We don't understand what energy is, where it comes from, what it does for us, and essentially, a significant part of our message is that energy is everything we do.
Thank you, Peter. Folks, thanks for
Sure.
joining. Noel Morin, I also am with SEH. We have other board members here as well. But again, in the interest of time, what I'd like to do is introduce our speakers. And Liz, thanks very much for the bios. They're quite long, so I'll just go fast. We'll start off with April. And April, do you pronounce your name the French way or Surprenant?
Surprenant.
Surprenant.
If
Okay.
you can do it in French, that'd be fabulous. But
I was looking online, I couldn't figure it out. So
yeah, it could be Surprenant, but we go
Surprenant.
with Surprenant. Thanks.
Surprenant. Yes. So April is the manager for the Strategic Services Group at SSFM International. And as Peter mentioned, local, but actually it's a broader organization. Her team is she has a team of progressive planners that cover projects related to community planning, resilience and sustainable planning, transportation and traffic planning, as well as environmental planning. She has more than 30 years of experience, previously oversaw the Coastal Zone Management Program for Hawaii County and was on the County Leadership Recovery Team in the aftermath of the Kilauea eruption back in 2018. She served on the state's Climate Change Mitigation and Adaptation Commission for 10 years and now sits on the state's Hazard Mitigation Forum. We also have Miley Lafave, I hope I pronounced your name right, is a licensed civil engineer on the civil transportation team at SSFM International, based in Honolulu. Is a graduate of UH Manoa with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. She brings expertise in transportation, drainage, stormwater management projects, such as road widening, roundabouts, complete street improvements, low impact development, and drainage master planning. Ollie Lau is a systems thinker, my kind of guy, by the way, who is passionate about reaching equitable planning solutions, informed by robust public engagement, and supported by data analysis. As a planner for SSFM International, he works with communities across Hawaii to advance climate resilience. Originally from the UK, he has worked on climate resilience and active transportation projects across the US and Pacific, with clients ranging from small rural communities to large federal agencies. He holds 2 master's degrees from the School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management at the University of Oregon and sits on the board of directors for Hawaii chapter of American Planning Association. Last but not least, Wendy McLean is deputy manager for SSFM's civil engineering group that includes professional staff in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Maui. She is a senior civil engineer and supervises project engineers and teams working on a wide variety of civil engineering projects. She has extensive experience in site development, site layout, wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, collection, and distribution and treatment systems, grading and drainage, pavement repairs, and project management. What else, Wendy? She's also experienced with low impact development and sustainable stormwater management design. And with that, I'm out of breath. I'm going to turn it over to your team. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us here. We're excited to be in this conversation with you all and share some of the work that we've been doing. To that end, SSFM has developed a position statement. Ollie, if you can, who's doing slides? Next slide. Yeah, there we go. Has developed this position statement on resilience, which we did in 2020 to signify our commitment to being a model of corporate responsibility and a leader in planning and engineering for solutions to mitigate, prepare for, and adapt, to the effects of climate change. So you'll hear today about some of the projects that we've done, but also some of the things that we are doing internally from a corporate standpoint. Our people live here and we are invested in Hawaii's future. For our clients, we take responsibility for staying informed on best practices and regulations, for providing information and guiding our clients to help them move forward for the best possible outcomes, both for them and for Hawaii. Sustainability and resilience are no longer buzzwords in our industry. They have become integrated and in some cases regulated into our industry practices. And our state cannot afford to approach the massive issues of climate change in an incomplete or reactive kind of way, which is really what has happened in the last decade and really is starting to be much more proactive. And we need to be intentional in order to make the best choices for our people, the land, and our resources. More about our firm. For 65 years, we have been in Hawaii. SSFM has really helped to shape Hawaii's built environment, bringing deep local knowledge and lasting commitment to all of the island's communities that we serve. We do have offices on all of the islands and we have projects on all of the islands. Across all of our services, we design with the future in mind. So we're always looking out for what's next in that progressive kind of way. From shoreline infrastructure to urban mobility, from rural development to emergency response planning, our work reflects a commitment to Hawaii's future. Our core values, which are integrity, progressiveness, client focus, and nurturing, are really the anchor of all of the work that we do. At our firm, we integrate climate resilience into everything we do. Internally, we have developed, this was about 5 years ago, developed an initial 5-year resilience strategy, which is being updated as we speak. And we're investing in our people through training, sustainability aligned benefits, and workplace culture and practices that prioritize health and climate consciousness. Our offices are also LEED Gold certified, and we are committed to being carbon neutral in the next 10 years. Externally, we have helped shape Hawaii's resilience landscape and working with agencies and communities to develop a forward-thinking planning process, the policies, and also design standards. We have led the state's first study on managed retreat, which was just completed last year. It's also an award-winning plan that we're quite proud of. We've crafted a disaster recovery strategy for small businesses and developed award-winning tools like Honolulu's climate adaptation design principles and Kauai's sea level rise zoning overlay that they use. And then lastly, we're amplifying our impact through thoughtful leadership, going to national conferences and participating in those, sometimes speaking at those, and also joining 1% for the Planet and the Climate Hawaii Pledge.
All right. Thanks, April. Hi, everyone. My name is Ollie, and I'm going to be taking us through one of our planning projects, just kind of spotlighting some of the resilience work that we do. And then I'm going to hand off to Wendy and Miley to take us through some of the civil work that we do. So as April mentioned, we recently completed a statewide managed retreat analysis, which was aimed at analyzing the policy, legal, and financial implications, of managed retreat for the state of Hawaii. This is the second managed retreat report. SSFM completed the first managed retreat report in 2019, which kind of was step one, I guess, managed retreat 101. And this was taking that a step further. I think it's important to note that, managed retreat gets a lot of attention, but it's only one part of the state's overall climate adaptation strategy, but it is a big part of it, and kind of a thornier question. And so that's why the state has been putting so much attention on it. So the project kind of went through a typical design cycle. We did plenty of research, particularly on the policy and the legal aspects of managed retreat as they currently exist in Hawaii, and then engaged agencies and subject matter experts to understand how any potential changes might impact them. We applied our knowledge to a case study, a couple of case studies, one on the North Shore of Oahu and one on the west side of Maui, which we'll get into, and also kind of then we created these recommendations and a framework for the state to take forward. And there's a QR code here, which you can scan, or we'll drop the link in the chat later on for where you can find that report. And so this slide is really just kind of our problem statement. This photo, I'm sure many of you have seen similar. This is from the North Shore of Oahu last winter around Camis. And, we've got accelerating shoreline erosion, structures that are imminently threatened, and no comprehensive statewide framework for climate adaptation. And our agencies often lack resources for proactive monitoring and enforcement. And what this leads to is a reactive and an enforcement-driven approach, which stretches our resources and results in ultimately in the damage and the loss of public trust resources. And so the purpose of our project was to try to be more proactive and think through a proactive framework that the state can apply to kind of meet that goal, right? This no comprehensive statewide framework. Maybe we can be the first piece in creating something that can be applied and that all the counties can kind of look to as they implement this work. So we had 6 objectives, the most important of which I think are these first 2: preserving and restoring public trust resources and protecting public health and safety. These were really centered in the project, making sure that access to the public trust, which is enshrined in law in Hawaii, is continues to be enabled in the face of shoreline erosion. We're also looking at how to mitigate the risk of coastal hazards to people and structures, how to adapt to climate change impacts, enhance public access to those coastal areas, not just preserving the existing public trust, but enhancing that access and minimizing harm to coastal environments. And what all of this research led to was the development of a beach resilience program with a specific focus on eroding sandy beaches. Now, the reason for this is, managed retreat could be is a huge project to try and tackle, especially with the differing coastlines across the state. And so we narrowed it down to this focus on eroding sandy beaches based on a couple of factors. One being, it's a complex jurisdictional issue. The state and the county have interlocking jurisdiction and regulatory oversight on the shoreline. It's also, the importance of preserving and restoring sandy beaches as a public trust resource is top of mind for a lot of folks in the state. And the state also has an interest in areas seaward of the shoreline as the owner of all of the land and the ocean makai of the high wash of the waves. And then this is also kind of ground zero for coastal erosion and managed retreat. Eroding sandy beaches are really the forefront of where we would expect folks to need to move development in the next few years. And so the way that we envisaged this program being put forward was through enabling legislation in Hawaii Revised Statutes 205A, which is the Coastal Zone Management Act. And then the designation of these beach resilience planning areas, which the purpose of this is taking a statewide framework that is, to be applied statewide and localizing it. So the goal would, and we'll kind of get into what that would look like as I step through the slides, but essentially looking at creating these resilience planning areas that require area-specific study and community engagement to develop the pathway and the mechanisms by which managed retreat will happen in that specific location. We came up with 6 kind of buckets for our recommendations and a total of 20 recommendations. So those were in policy recommendations, jurisdictional recommendations, planning, so how to guide the specific adaptation planning, regulatory, making sure that we're aligning regulations with the public trust priorities and long-term adaptation needs for folks in the state. Funding, which is, I think, a key element to this project. We tried to establish a number or identify a number of dedicated sustainable funding sources for climate adaptation and managed retreat. And then finally, land management, providing some solutions for the transfer of land in these areas and relocation of displaced residents, and then the management and restoration of these beach areas. This is a very high level overview of this project, and be happy to get into it more. But this recommendation, each recommendation has kind of an overview, time frame, and a lead entity, so as well as coordinating entities. So trying to identify who's going to take this forward, how they're going, when are they going to do it? So in this case, in the next couple of legislative cycles, ideally, and then going on, there's what considerations need to be taken into account, what the key implementation steps might be, a legal analysis, so and then finally funding and financing considerations to support each recommendation. And what that ended up looking like is something like this. So this is the 20 recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see, we've tried to kind of step them through time from near term to the future and highlighted the key recommendations, which you'll see are particularly in the near to the midterm, as well as some that are linked. So, number 5 here, designate planning areas, is linked to the development of these beach resilience plans and triggers and pathways. And so we took all of these recommendations and we applied them to a couple of case studies. So this is the first one. This is Sunset Beach. I'm sure it's a surprise to no one that Sunset Beach was included in this project. The current conditions, the whole neighborhood is built on sand dunes that were deposited by waves over time, and the beach and the area has a large seasonal variation in swell size, which leads to a large seasonal variation in beach width. And there's been a couple of house collapses here, one in March 2022 and in September 2024, and then one previously about 10 years ago as well. All properties also contain on-site sewage disposal, which is another kind of public health and safety element that we really need to take into account in these eroding sandy beaches, so that we don't end up with sewage spilling onto our coastlines. And so this is what a kind of the process, as we applied it, would look like. I think it's important to say here that the Sunset Beach case study and the Maui case study that I'll go through in just a second are pretty advanced. There's not a lot of options for these communities, because they're really, the goal, and our goal with this project, is to provide more options and to get ahead of this before it reaches this point. And so I think that's just something to have in mind, that ideally we put these in place, these recommendations in place before we get to the stage where we are now, where houses are already falling on the beach. And so pathways wise, we would need to enable the legislation and then legislate the area as part of the beach resilience program. At this point, owners within the planning area would be informed of the requirements and the restrictions. Then the planning happens. This area-specific adaptation pathway will be developed in conjunction with the community, discussing what triggers to put in place and communicate the actions that are required once triggers are reached. There's also kind of a carrot and stick element where property owners will be incentivized to take action early, and the longer it takes, the closer the erosion line gets to their home, the less likely or the more kind of enforcement actions come through. So we developed a property tagging system, somewhat similar to on the mainland, where a property can be red tagged, making it unable to be occupied. And then orange or yellow tags for folks who, maybe need to take action, but it's not imminently threatened. As I said, there's an enforcement component, and then a land trust. The final role would be working with land trusts or developing a conservancy to put perpetual conservation easements over that land, so that the public trust is maintained and the public access is maintained. You can see at the bottom that there are some funding options. That's the carrot portion, and those funding options maybe get removed the closer to the stick portion of the recommendations. The other case study that we applied this to was the Kahana Sunset Building F, so specifically Building F within the Kahana Sunset condominium in West Maui. And the reason we looked at this property is because the Sunset Beach area is predominantly made up of single-family homes and homeowner occupants, whereas the Kahana Sunset is a condominium, and so having to deal with the legal aspect of condominium property regime was something that the state wanted to look at. This building, again, it's actually unoccupied. Building F, it's been deemed unsafe to occupy since 2021, and the seawall fronting the building is failing. You can see the difference in the beach width over the last, I think the top photo is from 1976 and the bottom photo is from 2023. The Kahana Sunset does have a managed retreat plan. It was developed in 2024 as a requirement from the county as part of one of its emergency permits. And in this case, again, applying the framework to this site, there's really not a lot of options for them. Building F under the program, if the program existed, the building would be red tagged, and removal or relocation would be required, with enforcement action taken if the building was not removed, as well as easement fees collected because the seawall is currently encroaching onto state property on the beach. And for this particular case study, funding options wouldn't be available due to the red tag nature of the building. So really highlighting the kind of need to do something early to limit the impacts on both the public trust and also provide as many options to homeowners as possible. And so that is a very high level rapid fire whip through that project. I hope that if you have questions, please hold them till the end, but I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss them further, and we'll drop the link in the chat shortly. And now I will hand over to Wendy.
Thank you, Ollie. And yeah, so we'll just jump over to our civil engineering side of the house and actually talk about complete streets, which makes up one portion of our practice, primarily through our transportation group, but really all of our civil teams do interact with complete streets. And we work with our planning group very closely with developing of this complete streets. They come up with the concepts and we put them to the test of reality. So I'm going to jump to the next slide. So what is complete streets? It's a buzzword that's out there, but many may not have heard of it. But the idea really is that complete streets planning, the goal is to strengthen community resiliency by building transportation networks that are safer, more sustainable, and adaptive. They're really designed for all users, and that would include pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, as well as motorists, right? Like most of the traditional street design, as you go back to when our networks were first established, were really motorist centric, maybe a little bit of train in there, but for many, many years, it's been focused on the motorist and a bit on the transit. So now it's really trying to build that multimodal design where you're looking at all modes, you've only got so much limited space within your right of way. How are we going to adapt that space and allocate the space to be as inclusive and as possible? And the goal being making communities less dependent on a single mode of transportation, right? Where we can have multi-mode. And it advances resiliency by embedding flexibility, inclusivity, and environmental responsibility by reducing energy consumption, by supporting alternative transportation, and incorporating green infrastructure. So SFM has been involved with preparing several street design manuals throughout the state. The first being the Complete Streets Manual that was prepared for City and County of Honolulu, but we also prepared a street design manual for County of Hawaii. Right? What works for one county isn't going to work for the other. So this is the County of Hawaii Street Design Manual was adopted through resolution in May 2024. You can see here an example of the cross section here of really looking from the rural, which is the top graphic, graphic at the top of the page, and also looking at urban cross sections where it looks very different, right? Where you get your raised sidewalks in your urban, space planning for parking, versus the rural, maybe more shoulder space, having separation between the pedestrians by using landscaped spaces, and depending on how much traffic, you might be looking at several travel lanes as well. The next is an example of a project we did on Maui for Onehei Avenue roadway improvements. You can see the top picture is the before picture, where you had a very wide road wide of way, 2-lane road with a bike shoulder and a lot of really unused space. The adaptation with complete streets put it on a lane diet, put separation between the pedestrians, gave a pedestrian space to walk. This might not look like what it might look in for a solution in County of Hawaii, but it really worked well for Maui. Next page. And here's another one, Connie Street. And this is a good example where you can see the top graphic is of the existing conditions, and you have actually 4 lanes of 3 travel lanes and a turn lane, a really wide shoulder, somewhat narrow sidewalk, 6 feet. It's not terrible, but just wide enough for 2 people to walk, and a very shallow landscape strip. But reimagining the space, putting it on, well, how much traffic really space do you need? How many travel lanes? Really put in 2 travel lanes and a 2-way left turn lane. Space for bike lanes, landscape strip, and wide 10-foot pedestrian promenades on both sides of the road. Next slide. I think it goes, pass it over. Back to you, Ollie.
Back to me. Thanks, Wendy. Sorry, not too much of a reprieve from my voice. So I'm going to just take us back to the sea level rise and climate change focus and talk. I gave you a run through kind of statewide, big, gnarly policy problem, and now we're going to kind of dive into a site with an adaptation plan that's a little more kind of tangible and something able to get our hands around. So SSFM worked with our partners and with the County of Maui Department of Parks and Recreation on an adaptation plan for Ho'aloha Park in Kahului. And this was really an opportunity for the Department of Parks and Rec to re-envision the park, accommodate existing users and new users, and to make it more resilient to climate change. And so an adaptation plan specifically identifies hazards that might impact a community and then develops strategies to mitigate or adapt to the impact of those hazards. They typically have a longer time horizon than traditional planning documents, kind of 20-year general plan or community plan, in order to capture the unique challenge of planning for climate change. And they tend to include a high-level roadmap or steps to implement the strategies identified in the plan. And so for this project, we really leaned on an approach known as adaptation pathways. which you heard me mention kind of briefly during the managed retreat portion of this. So adaptation pathways, it's a planning approach used to address the uncertainty and challenge of planning for sea level rise and climate change, and really identifies a flexible and incremental decision-making and implementation process. So it helps us think through how we're going to implement something that might happen in 100 years rather than over a 20-year time horizon. And so actions along that pathway are triggered by specific observable conditions. And so an example, generic example is here on the screen. And we'll go through a kind of more detailed one of the one we developed for Ho'oaloha Park. But essentially the red line there is the implementation phase. And then each of the black dots are triggers. So once a trigger is reached, say, for example, the width of the beach is now only 5 feet, then you move to the next phase. And the next phase, we're looking at, in this case, doing some beach nourishment. And so there's a planning phase, and then we have the usable life for that one. Another trigger is reached, and we move to the next phase. And so hopefully the goal of this is to use these specific observable conditions rather than a fixed point in time, right? So we could say 2050, if we're looking at coastal erosion, for example, we might have reached the point that we needed to move before 2050, or we might not need to reach, but 2050, there might not be a problem and we might be able to kind of kick the can down the road for another 10 years. And so it allows us to plan for these actions along a pathway without kind of tying ourselves specifically to a moment in time. And that's where that provides that kind of inherent flexibility. And so Ho'oaloha Park is a small urban park in Kahului. It's a beach park in Kahului Harbor, and it's about 5 acres now. You can see the kind of green is the new parcel. They recently received some land dedicated from A&B that grew the park. And the impetus for this project came from a previous study, the Maui Beach Parks Vulnerability Assessment, where the county evaluated and assessed all 56 beach parks and 1 golf course that exist in the coastal zone. And that provided kind of high-level solutions and recommended that each beach park create its own adaptation plan, of which Ho'oaloha Park was the first. This is what the park looks like kind of close up. It's a well-used, well-loved park for its small space. There are 2 canoe clubs, the Hawaiian Canoe Club and Nakai Walu. Both have hale in the park. There's also a traditional hale. So there's a fore-dune at the Makai edge here with canoe access points, as well as a parking lot, and then the rear field is used for parking. There's often a huli chicken wagon there during the day, and for anybody that paddles and has paddled on Maui, I'm sure you've used this park before for regattas and used the overflow parking. Project kind of development wise, we did a number of technical studies with our project team, assessing kind of the site conditions and the infrastructure, as well as the traffic and circulation. We did a cultural, historic, and traditional uses report, and developed a park user profile, as well as conducted some sea level rise modeling. And all of that information, along with kind of robust community engagement from a project advisory committee and a number of other community outreach events, was used to develop our adaptation pathway that was then developed into an adaptation plan. So I'm going to take you quickly through a couple of the technical studies. The park user profile was really interesting. It showed us that so we sent this, I think we had 140 people respond. It was sent by mail and by a press release and some social media posts from the county, as well as we handed out flyers at a number of the summer regattas to kind of drive central users to the survey. So 66% of respondents used the park for canoe paddling, 90% are Maui residents. So it's a really local park. And many of them use it because of its unique characteristics. They're not just going there because it's the closest one to where they live. They're going there specifically, often to paddle or to use the ocean. Folks really wanted to see nature-based solutions in response to climate change, particularly increasing vegetation and shade, and a desire to ensure that, the park is not overdeveloped. They also indicated a real need for restrooms, as well as the cultural importance of the site. And so there was, demographically, a high amount of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander use of the park. We also developed these really cool, I think they're cool, heat maps. So we got folks to click around on a map online about the areas of the park that they use. And so in the top left, we've got all the users. And so you can see the red is more use, and the lighter colors going out, green to blue, less use. So you can see use really centered over this top right corner by Cafe Ole and over one of the canoe holly. But I think the interesting part is the bottom two. The power users of the park, if you will, are the wing foilers and the canoe clubs. And the canoe clubs you can see really center on the canoe hollies and then this shoreline access in the middle, whereas the wing foilers tend to use the shoreline access over to the kind of top right of the screen. And so that really helped us as we got into developing strategies and solutions for the park. The other thing I wanted to highlight was the sea level rise modeling that our colleagues at Integral Consulting did for us. So they conducted some bespoke modeling, and they used 2 erosion models in 3 sea level rise scenarios. So the first one, the one on the left here, is a sea level rise and storm erosion. So essentially, where will the shoreline be with sea level rise and erosion during a storm event? And you can see the kind of pink lines show the shoreline moving landward at a fairly rapid rate. And then on the right-hand side, we have an X-Beach model, which looks at dune erosion and coastal wave flooding. I will caveat this with I am not a modeler, so I can tell you more or less what this looks like, but please don't ask me questions about how the model works because that's not a me question. But the key takeaway really was the vegetation effect. So the top graph here is showing 3.2 feet of sea level rise with a vegetated dune. It is indicated by this kind of green line. And a vegetated dune withstands erosion from a 24-hour storm. Without the vegetated dune at 3.2 feet of sea level rise, without the vegetation, the dune is eroded and the storm wave floods the whole park and extends inland all the way back to Kahumano Avenue, which is the road adjacent to the park. And so this really taught us that vegetating the dunes can, at the foredune at the front of the park, can be a key solution to supporting the community. And so we took that information and information from all of our other technical studies and our community engagement and developed this adaptation pathway. You can see kind of we've got green, yellow, and red on the left side. That's current and near term, midterm, and long term. So in our short term, we're advocating for a number of strategies for the park, which is dune vegetation and planting, dune restoration, and then park management with Cafe Ole, the neighboring business, and then the Harbour District, which is kind of further to the northeast of the park. And then we identified a number of triggers, such as dune erosion, vegetation loss, the availability of sediment for dune restoration, and started to map out triggers along this pathway for how the Department of Parks and Rec and the park users can monitor what's happening in the park and move through adaptation as sea level rise starts to impact the park in different ways. So once the current term triggers are met, we move to the midterm where we're looking at beach nourishment and elevating the rear parking area to provide space for future relocation. And then our triggers are starting to change, right? We're less looking at dune erosion and more looking at how often does the canoe holly flood? If the canoe holly floods once a year, it's frustrating, but not a huge deal. But if you're starting to get flooding 5, 6, 7 times a year, then that's really starting to impact the ability of the canoe clubs to function. And that's a time where we need to start looking at moving to the next phase. And then the final phase was relocating the canoe holly to the Mauka lot. And so what that looks like in practice is something like this. So this is the short-term design. And you can see along the foredune, we've closed some of the canoe access points. And this was something that we really worked with the canoe clubs and the wing foilers to consolidate existing access points so that there's fewer locations for ocean water to come through and to come through and inundate the park. We implemented or proposed putting public restrooms and showers here, the purple box in the middle, and advocated for dune management, essentially a continuous dune all the way across this cell between the rock groin that you can see in front of the Maui Seaside Hotel and then Pier 2, which is part of Department of Harbors and Kahului Harbor. As we move to the midterm, we're looking at elevating that foredune up to 13 feet, which is the point at which the models show that sea level rise, that's the kind of highest that you, or the lowest that you could go without getting impacts from 3.2 feet of sea level rise. And this is a drawing here where you can see the canoes of what that might look like. So when we say 13 feet, we mean 13 feet above sea level, not above the point where the dune is currently sitting at, which is about 9 feet. So it's only about 4 feet of elevation. We also advocated for vegetation berms along the throughout the park, just kind of low lying, maybe 1 to 2 feet, that would just stop any water that did flow into the park, and then recommending elevating that rear field up to 10 feet above sea level so that the canoe haole have a place to go to in our final design concept. So a big part of these concepts was really, let's only move infrastructure once. If we can move things once and the county and the canoe clubs aren't disrupted, we're just back to a point where they can be for a long period of time. And with that, I will hand it back to Marley.
Thanks, Ollie. So I'm gonna spotlight a project here on Oahu, which marries the complete streets concepts that Wendy was discussing in green infrastructure. So I'll kind of get into some details of specific green infrastructure solutions that we used on this project. So this is the South Kalaheo Avenue and Kailua Road intersection improvements project. It's located in Kailua on Oahu. We just had our project blessing yesterday, so it's been in the news, might look a little bit familiar. This intersection is a very heavily trafficked area with all kinds of users, from vehicular traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, buses, kayakers, so a lot of traffic happening in this intersection. And it's also the entrance to a couple major beaches in the area, Kailua Beach Park and Lanikai Beach, which are really heavily used by tourists and locals. So the one of the main reasons for this project was to improve safety and circulation for those pedestrians and users of this intersection. And a part of that was to implement drainage infrastructure, because we knew that there was a lot of existing flooding and drainage issues here in the intersection. So we can go to the next slide. So this is what the project site initially looked like. It was kind of a odd roundabout situation. Is a rendering of the current condition. And so this implemented wider walkways and shared use paths. And then you can also see some of the green infrastructure along the walkways. So this project had quite a few constraints, and just with working within the right of way, we are limited with space. The intersection was also really flat, so we had to look at some pretty unique ways to deal with the drainage. And there was also a really high groundwater table in the area because it's right near the beach. So things that we had to take into consideration. One thing is that we don't currently have policies, at least for our civil work, that requires us to address sea level rise and climate resiliency. But the city and county of Honolulu does have criteria that they established in 2017 that requires us to treat stormwater runoff prior to it entering the city system, because it does outlet to the ocean. And one means, and a primary means of doing that, is to use low impact development, or LID solutions. And so I'll share some of those that we implemented on this project. So one of them being rain gardens, or they're also called bioretention basins. These are small basins that are along the roadside that capture stormwater, and then it's filtered through an engineered soil, which it removes pollutants prior to it infiltrating into the soils beneath. So where we can, we like to infiltrate runoff because this does go back into our water aquifers and it replenishes our water source. And so this is a great way to reuse and be on that kind of cycle of water use and how we can keep the water local instead of sending it all out to the ocean. So again, another way that we can infiltrate water, these are subsurface infiltration chambers. So essentially they're just big voids underground that water gets conveyed to, and then water can sit in here while it infiltrates into the soils below. We also used a couple different types of permeable pavers on this project. So these pavers replace standard concrete that we typically would use on walkways and roadway gutters. And these pavers are porous, so it allows water to flow through them instead of water flowing off of normal concrete. And then again, we're able to capture the water, put it through a couple layers of drain rock so that it can filter out pollutants, and then it's infiltrated into the underlying soils. And we use these quite a bit throughout the site, again, because it was really flat. So this was a great means of getting the runoff off the road and off the walkways without having to actually capture it and drain it downstream, where we'd usually use grading to do that. This is a manufactured pretreatment unit. So essentially water goes into this big tank, and there's a vortex that happens within this tank, and then the pollutants have time to settle out. So this is really good for a big trash capture, and there's a lot of sand in this area, so it can capture a lot of that. The debris sinks down to the bottom, and then the clean water can flow through and go beyond the rest of the system. And then lastly, these are inlet filters mainly used to capture large debris and rubbish that's on the roadside. And again, just another form of getting the pollutants out of the runoff that we're sending to the ocean and just trying to capture as much of that as we can. So green infrastructure and low impact development solutions provide many benefits, and they aid in creating resilient communities. They can mitigate carbon pollution. They manage flooding. They provide a means for water reuse. They can reduce urban heat and also reduce the impact of storm surges. So just trying to find ways that we can move away from gray infrastructure like hard piping and structures and towards green solutions that incorporate more natural elements. And then just want to close on the last one, that these solutions can be difficult to implement at times. They are really amazing solutions. But I think we still have a little bit of ways to go before these do become our standard practice, but I think we're on the right track. As I mentioned before, we don't have specific standards yet, but I'm sure that they're coming to address resiliency in our designs. So it can kind of be a hard sell to our clients sometimes since it's not a firm requirement. But these solutions are proven to work and we've seen them work, so we try and aid that conversation as much as we can. These solutions can add cost to the project. So for instance, this project, I believe about half of the cost here was for the drainage infrastructure. They also add additional time for construction and design, and the construction can be complex. But as we incorporate these drainage systems more, we're learning the nuances of how to implement them and what works best for each project site and situation. And we're seeing some really great successes. And I think we're on our way to making a big impact with green streets and turning our city and county facilities into resilient spaces.
Let me just say mahalo for this great presentation. It's spurred quite a few questions, I'm sure, with the audience here. If you're okay spending a few more minutes beyond 5 o'clock, that would be appreciated. And we'll open it up to questions. Anybody in the audience would like to ask questions? There's a question in the chat. What was the final cost of the roundabout, and what is the frequency of cleaning the filtration systems?
Yeah, I believe the final cost was around 11 million for the whole roundabout. And there are maintenance requirements for sure. That's also one of the hurdles, is getting the city and county to be on board to maintain these types of facilities. I think most of them are annual maintenance requirements, but also after large storms and things that would cause excess debris, then it normally would also trigger the need for some additional maintenance.
And if I could add to that, is one of the big elements of the design process was incorporating the maintenance folks within the conversation of the design. And that led to several design changes as we talked about pre-filtering, the frequency, what could they really handle? What kind of equipment do they have? What could they commit to? And street sweeping was a huge part of it, collecting up that rubbish, but that understanding of the challenges that they're already facing um, with their existing systems that they had. I think they just had one small uh, type of a dry well that they had, but guess what? It was filled with sand. It didn't have any capacity. So that was a big component of that process. So it did lead to design changes.
Wendy, thanks for raising that. I think that one thing that you just said that I think resonates quite a bit with me and many folks on the call, I hope, is that designing it so you take into account what's required to sustain it long term is really important, right? So you talk about what would be required to maintain the system and building that into the design to minimize the need for the expensive maintenance, but also ensuring that the budget is there, right, to ensure that that it's done, that there is operational support for that long term. I have there are a couple of questions in the chat. I just want to make sure that we go in order. Gary, we'll get to you too. Keith has a question. Has SSFM assessed, made recommendations regarding shoreline cesspools and salinity detected in island aquifers?
On our civil side, no, we've not, but we certainly have been involved with cesspool closures and such. And I hand it over to our planning group if they're involved in anything at this time.
Not at this time, other than raising the shoreline cesspools as an issue that need to be tackled by the in various ways, whether that's with the state or with the counties, but not actually kind of getting into salinity and detecting things in aquifers.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, I was pleased to see that roundabout design. I myself was involved in a Union Hall project where I had a large parking lot where we didn't want the swale that was required to take up so much of the parking lot, and we ended up burying large pipes like you showed to accommodate a 100-year storm. Slow the
Fabulous.
water down, let it
Yeah.
get into the ground, slow it down.
Thanks, Keith. Darren had a quick question. What happened to the tree? It was in the center. Was it saved?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd have to remark, it's actually better off for the project. If you go back to Miley's slide of the original condition, and this is actually a phase 2 of the project. The first project was a demonstration project, right? So part of the community grief with the project or frustrations is that we did a demonstration project first. They wanted the community wanted a signalized intersection here. And the more our planning group studied this and said, wow, it's going to contribute to noise, the space, the backups, it was going to make traffic worse, and it would take out the tree. Then as we studied the roundabout, you'll notice it looks more like an amoeba. Was really designing around that tree. We worked with an arborist to establish setbacks, but the original the existing conditions had power poles and comm lines running everywhere, which actually affected the pruning of the trees. So I don't know if you have trees. I'm trying to think of locations on the Big Island where you might have such situations, but where the overhead lines, you have to prune around them. So the tree was beginning to get lopsided. Right. And you can see all these power poles all over the place. And now, when we planned for the design, it was multi-phase. Two things was figuring out where could we place the power poles that we could relocate them at the beginning of the project before the contractor even showed up. So that took quite a little bit of design work, but also then how can we eliminate the power poles that and try to reroute them to allow the tree to grow and flourish. And that's what we've accomplished. So if you go out there today, the other side along the Kalapaway market side is starting to grow back and become more full.
Nice. Gary, you had a question?
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. Um, just wondering, as a group that's focused on managed retreat and on essentially disaster preparedness in the bigger picture, I'm wondering if any of you could offer up your thoughts as people who look at the world through this lens. When you look at the beaches or you look at the way in which we're doing things now, what are your most immediate concerns? And if you could wave a magic wand to try to wake us up to preparing for future scenarios, what would that look like?
Oof.
Sorry if it's a little broad.
I think a couple of things. I think nationally, I think Hawaii is well placed to deal with managed retreat. It may not feel like it sometimes, but legally, our public trust, the beaches and public trust access is enshrined in law, and that provides the counties with a lot of support for pursuing managed retreat policies in terms of the thing that counties are always worried about is prevailing in takings cases, right? And so I think that's one thing. If I could wave a magic wand, we wouldn't have developed in these places in the first place. But I guess if I could wave it, I would love to see the state enact a statewide framework that gives all of the counties the direction to work on this, and then provides them with kind of the cover to start moving forward in areas that are needed, and then really emphasizing that the local need, or the need to involve local folks and to plan early, because these are hard conversations and we can't shy away from that. They're hard, they're very emotionally charged, but the earlier we can plan for managed retreat, if it needs to happen, if it's going to happen, then the better the outcome is for the individual, and more, I guess, from my perspective, maybe more importantly, is the public trust. And this Colin Lee from the University of Hawaii always makes this point, and I think it's really important that individual homeowners get a lot of the oxygen, and maybe rightfully so, but the beaches are for everyone, and the ocean is for everyone. And if we don't center that, then we won't have beaches for everyone to enjoy.
Ollie, I would just like to add that, when we talk about managed retreat and, in the context of what you presented, we talked about the shoreline and beaches and, the properties that are at risk there, and what to do with them and what not to do in the future. But, as we look at essential infrastructure, wastewater treatment systems, our airports, our roadways, et cetera, and we look at what the forecast is for how the shoreline will evolve over decades, it kind of begs the question, are we doing the right things today in terms of planning, especially for these investments that could cost billions of dollars, right? And is there enough knowledge to influence the decision makers today so that we're not, decades from now, wishing that we had not done this investment like where we did it, right? So I'm just wondering, do you sense that there's enough knowledge and awareness so that these decisions are being made in the right way? Or are we more thinking short term, like we've got to put the fire out, we've got to, make sure we have a wastewater treatment plant that works? And so do you see enough long-term decision making being made as a result of the data we have today about climate?
Ollie, if you don't mind, I'm gonna take this one. And I'm happy for you to chime in on it. I do think we have enough information. I think we have enough data. I think the challenge is that we're talking about many years into the future, and I think the challenge is creating urgency today for what's going to happen 20, 30, 50 years from now. And I think the urgency is the piece that's missing. And not only that, in order to make those kinds of big shifts and big changes, particularly when it comes to our critical infrastructure, is that's a huge budget cost, which we're all lacking enough budget to do all of the things that we need to get done throughout the state. And so the state and the counties are having to prioritize based on what they have in front of them, which is only so much they can do today. And so I think it's that it's definitely the egg and the chicken, which comes first, and who's on first and who's on second. Situation, because I think the other thing I would say, and what I was thinking about when you first asked this question, Gary, is that one of the things that's very difficult for counties to put in place, having worked for one for many years, is getting the policies ready, getting policies in place and ready, so that when something happens, which it's always going to happen, we have things that happen, then we have something that's ready to adopt or put in place or amend, fix it a little bit, tweak it for the current situation, and then get that thing in place. And so I think that's one of the pieces that's kind of missing. I think one good example that Hawaii County did through their recovery office after the 2018 eruption and all of the properties that were inundated is they were able to get funds through FEMA to do a voluntary buyback program. So people weren't required to do this, but is voluntary. And so I think helping people get out of harm's way is a real solution. And I think looking at how to do that in an equitable way, because many of our properties that are in high hazard areas are lower priced properties. They're inconvenient. They don't have as many services, things like that. And so that's where those people and families want to go and live. I think the other economic issue with managed retreat is also a lot of our coastal properties are the highest economic value. And so trying to find that balance from an economic standpoint is a very challenging thing to maneuver. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but there's some readiness that I think the counties and the state could probably do a better job. Do we have the data? Do we have the information? Yes, I think we have that. Do we have the funding? Absolutely not. Do we have the political will? Not always. So it's a very complex place to navigate.
Yeah, we
April,
face similar challenges with regard to enabling or empowering people with knowledge about energy and the need to transition, right? So I think there's a big educational effort that's required so people can really appreciate and understand what it means, right? What this all means and what we need to do today so that future generations can thrive. We're 10 minutes over, and maybe just one last question. Darren, you had a question in the chat. Do you want to just ask it?
Yeah, I do. I do have a question, and I apologize because I was watching the presentation on a 4-inch screen. So if I missed something in what was presented, so I'm very interested in a potential buyout option for a lot of these people that live on shoreline properties, and some of them feel trapped that the inevitable shrinking shoreline is part of their fate, and how do they escape it without taking a full loss on their property. And has there been any sort of assessment on what the counties or state governments would need to kind of put aside for these possible buyout options? And because I've also watched friends and family go through situations where they become their property owners in a slide zone on the island, and then they have to fight with the city to try to get some sort of buyout or foreclosure on their properties?
I think that's a great question, Darren. I will say that at the state level, at the legislative level, there is not a lot of appetite to pursue a buyback program, mostly for the reasons that you outlined, that it would be horrendously expensive. And so one of the things that we got into with the managed retreat strategy, one of the members of our project team from Integral Consulting, who we work with a lot, is an economist, and this is his whole world is looking at environmental economics. And so we really looked at different ways to try and create an equitable way to structure a program that wouldn't require just whole scale buyouts. And I think one of those is this idea of buyout leaseback, where you maybe you buy out the property, but then the homeowner can lease it back. It enables them to stay longer term and generate some revenue for the state to offset the cost of the buyout. There was also kind of looking at other ways, everybody's favorite, using the TAT funding to fuel some of this. But yeah, I mean, I think buyouts are a real struggle, and I think the state, however they choose to implement this, will be looking at ways to not do whole scale buyouts, but to do targeted funding on a means tested basis, so that the folks that really need it, right, generational families who have lived on the shoreline forever, are supported, but second or third homeowners who have the means to buy in cash are maybe less supported. And so I don't know exactly what that will look like, but I think that is, I imagine that is an approach that the state will take to try and mitigate this, because, you know, as April said, we just don't have the funding as a state, and no state does. You know, California with its billions also doesn't have the funding to just wholesale buy out its coastal property owners.
Ollie,
There are a couple
Miley.
of other ways. I'm sorry. There are a couple other two other points about that I'll just add. One is we do have transfer development rights that is operational through state legislation, but none of the counties have actually taken that on as a real. It's complicated is why, but that would basically allow someone to transfer their rights from one property to another property in order to get out of a hazard area, coastal area, whatever like that. And you could basically take the density that you would get on that property and use it in addition to on a different property. That's one option. Another option is a lot of jurisdictions have passed a referendum or the like to take a certain, percentage of taxes to put into an account for specifically for buyout, and in that case they buy it out at market. And that's not unlike what a lot of the counties, I know Big Island has the open space plan, and has frankly been very effective and successful in buying out coastal properties in certain areas, particularly in Ka'u and North and South Kohala. And so, I think we could probably do a better job to make something like that more effective. But there are things like that. I know there are jurisdictions in Colorado, for example, that they buy out a couple every year. They use that bucket of funds to buy out a few properties within certain flood zones, and then they demolish the houses and make it open space. So that's
April,
all.
thank you for that. I'd like to wrap us up. I know it's late on a Friday. Really appreciate your team and you coming along here to share what you're doing, all this wonderful work you're doing. So April, Wendy, Miley, and Ollie, thank you so much. We will post the recording on the website, and looking forward to future conversations. Thanks again for all you do.